Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Dracula Untold. So, the story of this character is to really dip into a much more historical kind of approach that seems to be like a much more like if Vlad the Impaler was to have a much more legitimate approach, like Dracula Untold would be it. Whereas I never really quite got the whole like tuxedoed romantic variation of Dracula. It never made sense to me. Where we have this character that is to go on and try to woo these women and is to go and sneak into their beds at night and just like, I love you, whoever you are, and suck and drain their blood. It doesn't make sense to me. Like I would like a much more darker character, a much more grittier kind of variation, because the whole Dracula who romances people never made sense to me. Even though like there is some fun variations, uh, but anyways, so immediately going into this show or this movie, I mean, there is some kind of versions that feel similar to this because of course there's a billion of them. To me this kind of comes off as Dracula 2000, but Dracula 2000 was of course done in more modern times, where this of course is to take place in like 1774, I think, or 1772. And of course, Transylvania. Well, technically Turkey and Transylvania, but still. But the way of which of this movie ends, there is kind of a changing of time of sorts. But anyways, this movie also like I hope this movie like is to be similar to Morbius because technically that movie hasn't come out yet, and that's immediately where I would probably go to compare the two of these films. And hopefully I can go on and say that Morbius is a good film because it hasn't come out yet. So if you want to go on and wait till whenever the heck that comes out, and then I can review that finally, then I can say, oh yeah, definitely this felt like Dracula Untold. So what is this story about? Because I've taken way too much time to just go on and talk about Dracula or Dracula or Drake or whatever goofy name that this character had to be fused and changed and whatever. Uh, anyways, so in this story, we of course have a guy who is to be called the Sultan, who is May Mehmed Mohammed 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 Mohammed. I want to say Mohammed, but I think it's Mohammed. I don't remember names all that well. People realize that about me. Uh, Dominic Cooper is, of course, by Muhammad, or the guy who is to be called the Sultan in this movie. And so we have the Sultan who goes on and is to steal 1,000 sons from Transylvanian people and are to add them onto their regime of soldiers. And it seems like there has been a good gapping of time for that to have happened. To where, of course, Vlad, who is to transition into Vlad the Impaler, was to go on and join this regime. And then it seems that they no longer needed Vlad, so he decided to just become this Count Dracula who's kind of watching over Transylvania. So there have been, again, some time gap between the last time that they have asked for 1,000 people. And so, of course, this time around, these guys are to start to get greedy. And they're just like, you know what? How about we just go on and just start asking for 1,000 people again? Like, why not? Like, like you guys got all the numbers right. It's been a couple of generations since we've asked for 1,000 men, so this feels like the perfect time. So that of course creates conflict because Vlad is losing his son because of all this rigmarole, and so now we have to have Vlad forcibly making a choice here, forcibly realizing that he needs to go on and defend his people from the Turkish army. And he of course is to find out about this menacing creature that he has seen in action, and he is to have to desperately plea to this monstrous being, making a deal with it to go on and try to save his people and to take every enemy out of play, so Vlad and his people can go back to ignorant bliss. Vlad is realizing that this war is taking far too long, and Vlad is to only have a time limit between transitioning from a normal human or to stay a vampire forever. And so he kind of has to really kind of put the gas immediately when Vlad is to go on and become this Dracula like character and to wipe out the Turkish army and the Sultan also. So there's kind of many different layers of people that Vlad is going to have to go into and take down. And so that leads Vlad to forcibly, towards the end of this film, make a choice. So, how would I grade this film? I would say that this Dracula variation is a lot better than other Dracula films. And a lot of people would just go on and say it's like, well, it's just like a fighting movie, it's just a battle film. A lot of people would probably go on and probably have maybe goofy problems with this film. Some people might actually enjoy this film or like this as equally as some other Dracula variations, or they might like this a lot more just because of the way it's like approached. I think the only possible thing, um, there's a lot of like rushiness going on with this movie. Like, you can't really buy one person going up against a mass number of people, but then they have to do a lot of special effects with this film, which if it's a Brothers project, I'm kind of always worried about that, simply because it just like this movie would be a really hard film to try to do a lot of special effects on, simply because like it's it's like the Matrix. It's Neo against a number of Smiths, and that's like trickled throughout this whole entire film. But the interesting thing of it is it's another movie where we're technically rooting for the villain here, and that's kind of always strange to me. Where you realize that Dracula has gone on to be a number of villains in a number of things, but this time around you're actually rooting for the success of this character, which just feels weird. But you're realizing that it's like, well, like, why can't I just root for the villain? Because he's obviously going to like beat the out of people, and it's going to be really cool. So I would have to dub this movie like, I want to say that it's like, I would say that it's a good film. Um, Really, there's like very little to no story to be told in this movie. So there's not much to tell with it being called Untold. It's just like, hey guys, we're doing a much more unique story than anyone else is, so all of them. Because they went into the same old song and dance route with the tuxedoed, romantic Dracula And so since we're doing this version, like, really they just took a title to tick a lot of people off, but to also go on and try to make this movie easily searchable. Because there's a billion freaking Dracula stuff out there. So, with that said, let's go into an untold story and tell you all about it. So, let's go out of our way to go into spoilers about this one. And, like, I would have to say this is a good, if not, like, creeping into great territory with this movie. Just because it's a unique story. I like where it's like one man against an army, because I love those kinds of stories where it's like this character is grossly outnumbered and there's no way for him to win, and he's just like, well, I'm gonna win anyways. Like, I like, that's all I can do. I have to win for my people. And like, there's a kind of respect out of that. You can go on and you can probably have a General Zod story from Superman, and because like Man of Steel could almost have you at some point like empathize with General Zod, where he's like, but like my people, like I needed to save my people. And Superman of course is going on and telling Zod, it's like, well, Krypton had his chance, sorry, like, too late, too bad. So with that said, let's go into that double five, because it's otherwise that time yet again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this film, we of course had this setup of like 1770. I keep saying 72 or 74. People can correct me when you watch this film. I think it's probably 74. So, we are told within this story that there is to, of course, been 1,000 people that are to have been 1,000 men that are to have been taken from Transylvania in 1774, and so there has been some gap of time. It seems like there hasn't been a whole heck of a lot of wars going on, and so Vlad had been taken from his father to join these 1,000 men to battle with a guy who he is to eventually call the Sultan. So Vlad, I guess, is to win over a battle, and he is to go on and to get his own castle, and is to kind of watch over Transylvania. So all of a sudden we have Vlad and his people from Transylvania who are starting to feel there's a possibility that the Turkish people, or the Turks in this movie, are possibly bringing scouts out to certain locations to really just wipe them out. And so Vlad is to make his way with a number of people to just kind of do his own reconnaissance or scouting out himself, to go on and find out this Turkish scouting helmet that, of course, is to have this kind of blood upon it. And Vlad is like, okay, like, kind of wonder why this scout helmet is here, but it's evident that if these guys are coming, they're going to do some killing. They're going to wipe us out. So we kind of have to be leery about what's going on here. So Vlad is to tell his men that are with him that he wants them all to go on, to go back to Transylvania, because if there really is going to be some Turkish force that is going to come a-coming, then really these people should be there, so they are to not make it there unannounced by anyone. So Vlad goes on and he is to go into this cave with two other men. And so Vlad is to go on into this cave, and all of a sudden they have these lights and they start to go in this cave because they hear something. So we have an animal that is to seemingly resemble a wolf of sorts or a creature of sorts. We're not quite sure. But we'll have Vlad go on to research books about this creature. So, Vlad is to get out of this cave, of course, unscathed, because what I just told you would make a lot of sense to say that he had gotten unscathed and ran out after his both of his men were, of course, to be killed. There was nothing that Vlad could do. He ran off. So Vlad decided to go on and research to ask, I think, one of his, I think the friar there, about a possible creature of some sorts that looks very unusual. And so that leads to this guy being versed in monsters and whatever, and saying that there could be a possibility that at this broken tooth, whatever cave, that there lies a vampire possibility that had been attacked by some previous monster to turn him into a vampire. Which, of course, the key word there is pie. So we go on and we have Vlad and everybody who are, of course, just kind of sitting around, just kind of waiting for something to happen here. Because if there is no war seemingly coming to their doorstep, they're just like, oh, okay, well, like, let's kind of treat this as like nothing ever happened, and kind of let's kind of just be very observant. So all of a sudden, the Turks make their way into Vlad's castle, and so one of the Turks is to mention to Vlad that it seems that a number of their scouts had gone missing. And Vlad's like, well, I know nothing about that, so I'm sorry that you've lost some of your ranks. And so we immediately have this guy who's like, you know what? Because we just lost people, how about we just kind of pull 1,000 men from you? And Vlad's like, no, you can't do that. Like, you haven't done that in a number of years. Why all of a sudden do that now? He's like, because we can. So, and they're really kind of hankering on the fact that they want Vlad's son. Because, of course, Dracula had gone and done that, or Vlad had done that before. Now it's a tradition, I guess, to just pluck out, of course, Vlad's son. So Vlad goes on and meets with the Sultan and is to really, like, say, like, come on, like, is this really what you want? Like, are you really going to start, like, taking 1,000 men from me again? From my father and now me? And the Sultan is just like, well, yeah, like, I'm definitely going to take your son. Like, you know what? You're still young. Like, you can probably go and have another one. Like, I don't care. Like, just like it still feels like you can pop another bad boy out. Like, come on. So, but Vlad bargains to the Sultan that, wait a minute, like, how about instead of taking 1,000 men, you take me instead? Like, I'm worth 1,000 men. And we have the Sultan who's just like, like, I can take that bargain. But he still wants Vlad's son also. So, either you slice it and dice it, Vlad or his son may die, and there may not be no lineage to continue on here. So, Vlad and Vlad's son are going to get this handoff here. Who, of course, is Ingerius. Ingerius, I believe, is Vlad's son. So, Vlad, of course, is talking to these Turkish men, and he is to kind of toss down his sword, feeling like he's going to give up really easy. And even the Turk guy is mentioning to Vlad, he's like, you know, you gave up like really easy. I thought you were going to like be very like rebellious. I thought you were going to fight against us or whatever. And we find out that that actually is going to be true. So Vlad tells his son to run off to his mother, and he just starts slicing and dicing through all of these men. And so now all of his people that aligned himself with Vlad are now asking, what are we going to do? We don't have the numbers to fight these Turkish men. And Vlad's like, I think I'm going to figure out a way to help us. So Vlad goes on and he meets with this this master vampire, as they call him in IMDb. Of course, Charles Dance, which, if anybody's know Charles Dance, you've kind of seen him in a number of films, like specifically The Golden Child. Isn't this kind of funny that technically Charles Dance has played the devil and has also played the person who is to sire Dracula. And also, he's being the villain of Last Action Hero. Rosemary's Baby. Freddy Krueger. He starts just rattling off all these names like towards the end of like Last Action Hero, because he has this magic ticket that can get him any single character from a film, and he thinks that he can easily control all of them. Doesn't quite make sense. Moving on. So, and you would kind of think that any number of those villains wouldn't probably work as well as they do in any number of like horror films, because I don't think they could actually be unstoppable in a reality scenario. Because look at Arnold in that film, the guy who Arnold plays in that movie, not Arnold. He starts to like die towards the end of that film. Spoilers, anyways. Pushing on. So Vlad, like I said, is to go on and start to slice and dice these guys. So Vlad makes his way back to this cave, and we have the master vampire who's telling Vlad, it's like, wow, you seem really brave, because no one would come back here. Like, what are you coming here for? It's like, man, you're just really, it's either you're really brave or you're really stupid. So Vlad goes on and he desperately needs help. And since Vlad has seen this guy in action, he's like, I understand completely how strong this guy is. And so we have it where the vampire, or the master vampire, is asking Vlad here if he has gone by a number of other names. That he has gone by Count Dracula, the son of the devil, and that this guy has possibly killed thousands of men. And Vlad goes on and he says, it's like, well, I'm actually the son of the dragon, and actually I only killed hundreds of men. And the master vampire is slamming Vlad against this wall, and he's like, don't lie to me. And Vlad's like, okay, I killed thousands. So he's like, okay. So the master vampire is to go and pour this thing of blood into this skull, or this leaf. I want to say it's like a skull. So the vampire is to go and tell Dracula that's like, you're going to have this power for 3 whole days. If you can avoid thirsting upon a person, you will become mortal again. But if you thirst and you drink anyone's blood during those 3 days, you will become a vampire forever. And you will then go on, and I will at some point, at some time, will come a calling for you. and to fight this immortal war that I don't think is ever going to happen, in all honesty, unless there's going to be somehow or another. Because I have a feeling that it would be great to bring this character back somehow, but I just don't feel like it's ever going to happen. Or if it does, a lot of people are just like, "Oh my God, that's Dracula, Untold Dracula! Oh my God!" But I just don't think it's ever really going to happen, even though I'd love to see that again. Um, just to kind of have this like perfect universal monster characters that they've been trying to do for a bajillion years, which definitely you can go on and see Monster Squad and get that kind of like feel of it. But anyways, like they tried it with the Mummy and Jekyll and Hyde, and uh, like they're like kind of winking at it, but they're anyways. I just don't feel like there's ever going to be a good enough movie that's going to like overwhelmingly have people like, yeah, let's Avengers style this up. So, because there's just a lot of like red tape like mixing around between all of that. So, with that said, so we have Dracula who is to obtain the power, and so now he has to die. And like some parts of this does kind of feel like Queen of the Damned kind of eshed, even though instead of Dracula in Queen of the Damned we have Lestat that of course would be that character for Queen of the Damned, but it's still a pretty good story. Uh, but most of it kind of takes place in like technically modern time. Nah, it's very loose. Anyways, so Dracula dies, and he is to wake up by this thing of water, all of a sudden to have his wedding ring burning his hand. So, of course, he has to go on and take it off. But then Dracula is to go and find this necklace to put his ring back on so he can, because it's his wedding ring, he can't just leave it there. So, Dracula is realizing as he's waking up and he's trying to move, he can start to break rocks and he can re-heal his hands. So Dracula's like, well, okay, this is going to become useful. So Dracula quickly makes his way to just kind of run back to Transylvania to save his people. All of a sudden, he realizes that he can change from a person to a number of bats. And I'm like, where was this in Batman Begins? Alfred, or how to bat sound. I don't know. They probably sound more like me or whatever. Anyways, wee. I don't know. I can't do sound effects for everything. So we go on and we have Dracula like trying to figure out how he can be a number of bats and then himself. So he makes it all the way back to Transylvania, where all of a sudden we have this massive Turkish army that is to, of course, be at the doors of Transylvania, and Dracula is to go on and turn to his people, and he's like, I got this. And so he walks out there, and we're thinking of like, wait a minute, like this is gonna probably be really hard to try to like do and try to put together, because like I'm immediately thinking there's a lot of times where they forcibly have to just kind of like just show like bodies being chucked way into the air so they can kind of cut through all these big massive battles to try and figure out like easy transitions and stuff like that. But like you gotta give them this though, like this is like such like there's a lot more fascinating battle things going on in this movie than I've seen in a lot of other monster kind of films. And it's kind of really interesting when Vlad was talking to the vampire or the master vampire, and he was saying like, well, hey, like maybe what these people don't need is a man. Maybe what they need is a monster to help them. So Dracula goes on and barrels through all of these men, and then afterwards he's to take every single head and put them on spikes. And so Vlad is to leave one guy alive to have the Sultan find him and a number of these headed men. And so now the Sultan is just kind of like, wow, I guess we need a completely different strategy because this one guy wiped us all out, and this doesn't make sense. So weirdly, like, this movie also at some points comes off as like Highlander, because we start to have these Transylvanian people that are kind of ungrateful, as Vlad is to go on and evacuate his whole place because he's like, guys, we need to leave here because they're going to come back for us and they're going to do whatever needs to be done to take us out. So we need to evacuate this place to go elsewhere. So everyone evacuates from the town and they go on to another place, another town. And so everybody is starting to question how exactly Vlad is to be able to take all these people down, because it actually doesn't make sense. Because at one point, we have Vlad who's trying to avoid thirsting upon people, because immediately once Dracula is to go on and turn into a vampire, he's starting to like kind of see and kind of see people and heartbeats and pulses, and he's just starting to really get like this stuff under his skin, and he's just trying to avoid all of it. He's trying to avoid being tempted. So he even gets into the throes of passion with his wife, but then Vlad is to say, it's like, you know what, I need some air. And of course, we have his wife, um, um, Murena, and like by the end of the film, she just becomes Mira. So, kind of a switching of names here. Murena, Murena, I don't know. We of course have Vlad's wife that is asking Vlad what is wrong, and so Vlad is to, of course, tell his wife as he is to kind of hurt himself and it heals, and he cuts open the sheet and he starts to burn, and she's like, oh my god, like, what happened to you? And Vlad's like, well, hey, I made a deal to protect our people. And so we have Vlad's wife that is protecting him and telling everybody to just go on, because Vlad is going to wait till the sun goes down for him to go back into taking down the Turkish people. So Vlad's wife is telling all of his operatives, all of his people, that he is going to go off on his own to do his own reconnaissance and to just kind of let them all go on. And everybody's just like, well, like that, like he's our best soldier and he's just going to go and F off on his own? Like, what a prima donna, or something like they don't really trust him at this point. They kind of are second guessing what the heck Vlad is really doing. And so once they get to this town, and Vlad had gone on and killed again a number of Turkish people, while a number of these Transylvanian people are to all die. And so when Vlad is to go on and to transform into a number of these bats, taking down these Turkish people, again, all the Transylvanian people are just like, fuck, like that. What the heck is that? Like, what is he like? Like this guy must be some kind of freak or some kind of monster. And so, once when they finally get to this sheltered place, they all start turning against Vlad because now they're starting to realize what he is. And so this is kind of like the Highlander moment when Connor McLeod is to go on and fight this battle, this war, and he is to be the only real survivor that comes back from it. All of a sudden, all of his people are to turn against him because they're like, wait a minute, like, this guy should obviously be dead. Like, this guy had an injury which should have led to him being dead. Like, so, like, he must have made a deal with the devil to save his life. So, like, we're gonna go and and torch him and pitchfork him and try to run him out of our town. And so, like, McLeod goes on and he goes with his wife off to some cabin somewhere where they can go and f off. And Cloud just kind of hangs on there until his wife dies, and so Connor just kind of moves on because a number of years have all passed and yada yada yada. So, but this time around, we have Vlad, of course, who is to be confronted by this friar, realizing that Vlad may be a vampire. And so we have the friar who confronts Dracula, immediately realizing that he is a vampire. So the friar goes on and is to try to cut open one of the parts of the sheets or kind of roofs of this home to have, of course, Vlad start to burn up. And all of a sudden that leads to them desperately wanting to try and burn down the house that, of course, Vlad is in. And so now, of course, we have both Vlad's wife and Vlad's son who are just kind of very upset about these people. And when Vlad, of course, makes it out of this house after it's gone and burned down, Vlad is really just upset with how ungrateful all these people were for how he's basically gone and consistently tried to save their lives, and they would try to turn around and kill him for like desperately doing whatever he could to save all of them. I would have been like, you know what? Why did I go this far to help you? Why did I try so hard to help you? It makes no sense. Like, if I'm just going to get grief in return, if I'm just going to get people pitchforking and spitting in my face, why should I help you? So, because it's the right thing to do. When it's going to lead to this person's death because they're a freak or they're a weirdo or they're whatever, these guys should be shining this guy's shoes. These guys should be polishing this guy's armor. It doesn't matter where he got this power from. It doesn't matter that he's just a little bit different than anybody else. They should be singing songs about this guy. Sadly enough. Anyways, so we then have it where the Turkish people come in and they start killing a bunch of these Transylvanian people. And also, they go on to take Vlad's son, and they also go on and at one point kill Vlad's wife. And so, since Vlad does not have enough time left to kill all the people he needs to kill, save his own son, Vlad's wife is telling Vlad that he needs to go on and consume his wife's blood so he can remain a vampire for as long as it takes to wipe out all these Turkish people. Well, mainly just wipe out the army, the Sultan, and the people who were to try to go up against them, and to save their son. So, nothing against the Turkish people, it's just the way this story is technically written. So, Vlad then goes on and is to drink his wife's blood and is to like, nah! He's very like Wolverine origin, like Vlad character. And so like you kind of really love those moments because we always like want the thought process of like this character who is to really like there's probably hatred of the fact that he forcibly has to do this, that he forcibly like is coming down to not have a choice. And so like he has to remain this monstrous being that could probably mean that he could never go on and meet his wife in the afterlife because there is no way to kill or destroy or whatever Dracula, possibly. So, like, that might be running through his brain. Also, the fact of just, like, there's a possibility that this is a war that may never end. And so this guy could possibly go on, and even when he wipes out these people, there's a good possibility that there's just going to be someone else that he's going to have to go on. And like so this may be a never-ending thing for him, because it technically has been a never-ending thing, because we of course had Vlad, who is to put away his dragon armor and is to hope that he never has to use it again. So there's a number of things just kind of where like Vlad is just like, well, like I don't want to be this guy again. I don't want to like, but like there's so many things where it's just like it's not his choice anymore. Like it's kind of funny when we go into a number of these situations and you always think it's like, well, the person who turns into the monster or the person that is to go on and like a lot of people say that, oh, well, like they had a choice to turn away from all this. Did they? Did they really? When it comes down to always an outnumbered scenario where it's a war they can't win and it's either to run away and hiding and hope that one day some person is not going to come for them, there's always that possibility, or it's just like, hey, just go out and blaze the glory. But with this situation, we have a war that Vlad can technically win, because Vlad can go on and create an unstoppable army that, of course, he is to go up against the Sultan with. So, Vlad goes on, and you would have thought there would have been a possibility that Vlad would have not drained the blood of his wife, and maybe she would have turned into a vampire also. But that would have been kind of weird, right? He would at least fought with his wife, and they would have been together forever. But that probably wouldn't have worked out very well for the tail end of this whole thing. But anyways, pushing on. So Vlad goes on and is to see a number of Transylvanian people who I guess are all near death because of the battle that had went on. And so Vlad is to decide to turn a number of these people. Doesn't matter who they are, it could be women, could be men, strong, weak, whatever. They're all going to be vampires and be unstoppable characters that consistently go on and tear these people apart. Because strength means nothing when you're a vampire that can like easily fling people in the air because you can. So Vlad goes on and is to turn a number of people, and so we have Vlad coming in with all of these people to take down the Sultan and all of his men, and we of course now have the vampires that are with Vlad going on and saying it's like, well, like at first it was like, well, there was too many of you Turk people, but now there's not enough because now they're gonna get freaking just like sliced and diced through. It's gonna be a horrible scenario here. So Vlad then goes on and is to make his way to the Sultan because everything else is going to be taken care of here. So somehow or another, we find out that the Sultan is to figure out that silver, of course, is Vlad's weakness. So the Sultan is to go on and pour a number of bags of silver all around himself, and when Vlad is to make it closer and closer to the Sultan starts slicing through all these bags, dumping more and more of these silver coins, and the Sultan is, or the Vlad is to start to get very weak, if not equal to the Sultan. It's kind of like Superman being in the presence of kryptonite, and so he's starting to just kind of buckle, and so the Sultan is like pretty well like taking care of Dracula, and the Sultan is saying to like Vlad, he's just like, well, where is the strength that I heard about? Like, where is the monster that I heard of? Like, so this guy starts taking him out, smacking him around, and so now we go on and have the Sultan who is to grab this stake and mention it's like, well, like I guess I'm gonna go on and take this stake and stab into your heart and kill you like any normal man. And so we have Vlad's son that is watching on here. And so before the Sultan is to go and stab into Vlad here, Vlad is to disappear as these bats and is to kind of switch things around and is to stab into the Sultan. And so then we have Vlad who pushes the Sultan into all this silver and is to take his son and get the heck out of there. So all of a sudden all these vampires are left and Vlad is with his son kind of making it out of there. And so now the vampires are realizing that, like, you know what, like, this no longer is a war between the Transylvanian people and the Turkish people. Now it's becoming a war between vampires and the human race. So anybody who is to be a normal human needs to get wiped out. I'm like, well, maybe you guys never saw the movie Daybreak. Probably not a good idea. Yeah. I've seen a vampire world. Doesn't really work out all that well, sadly enough. But in theory, anyways, hopefully there's never a day of sun But then again, like I guess vampires don't really need certain things like crop or to be tan so they can get some vitamin D or whatever. Anyways, so all of a sudden the friar comes back. He's still alive, and so the friar is to grab Dracula's son, and so Vlad is telling his son that he loves him and like he'll always be there for him. So Vlad is telling this friar, it's like you protect my son. And so, because the friars have this cross, and all these guys are kind of forwarded by this cross. So they run out of here, both the friar and Vlad's son. And so Vlad parts the sky. The sun comes in because Dracula has this weathered power where he, of course, is to make it a very cloudy or a rainy day or whichever, so that way he can like have the ability to not always fight in the sun, which is kind of convenient. Man, would that be a really sucky vampire film if you're just thinking like, oh yeah, like hey, like I can immediately take these vampires down because during the day it's like, and the vampires like, oh no, clouds, rain, lightning, and then people like, wouldn't that be a horrible thing? Because you're just thinking like, oh yeah, sunlight, we're gonna be like a-okay, and the vampire is like, clouds. I want to see that happen. Sadly enough, uh, as long as I'm not involved in that kind of horror scenario, because that would be straight up awful. But like that would be like kind of finally a place where because you'd have like let's mention it, you have like Twilight that supposedly doesn't like, it's not a sunny place all that often. There's a lot of like clouds and whatever, and they kind of picked the perfect time of year, I guess, to come on down to certain parts of town. So, and they probably homeschool them too. So we also have Vlad, who we'll get back to the story. We have Vlad who parts the sun, and all of a sudden, all these vampires get dusted, and Vlad is going on, and he's starting to kind of wither away, also, but not as badly as everyone else. So we have this kind of very grizzled, homeless-looking man that at one point is to want to assist Vlad, and this guy, of course, is to consistently call Vlad Master, and we have this character that is to bring Vlad back to life by dropping things of blood into his mouth, which resurrects him. And so we have Vlad live on. And so the next thing that we end up seeing is that there are several different years that have passed and have us now go on to what is to be called more current time. And so Vlad goes on, and he's going in through the city, and there's a woman there that is going on and I think trying to purchase a thing of flowers, I believe. And so Dracula all of a sudden is quoting this one poem that I guess is this girl's favorite poem, as well as Vlad is kind of going on and calling her my lady. And we have this girl who calls herself Mira, who's saying like, "Well, where are you from?" So Vlad runs off with Mira, and we have the master vampire that's just kind of watching on. And he's just kind of twiddling his fingers, and he's like, "Well, like let the games begin," because at some point the master vampire was going to call on Dracula to assist him. And so I guess maybe if there were ever was going to be a sequel out of this, we're possibly going to see what that whole thing was. More than likely, we're probably not going to see anything out of this, but wouldn't it be cool if we did? Because I think with time, eventually anything could be possible as long as a movie is to still be good enough. When really looking at it, I think it's a crazy amount of time when you would go on and see a movie that had been done a number of years ago all of a sudden bizarrely get a sequel oddly out of nowhere. Kind of like with Unbreakable and Split, or possibly when you look at it now, there's like any number of things where everybody's trying to scramble for stuff now, where all of a sudden you would go and have the Matrix and all these other kind of big la-di-da things. They're all just like, well, now we're gonna have to do a sequel to this thing. I don't care how good or bad it is. We're just gonna plop another one of these out because we don't care. Blah 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 blah. And so, yeah, like there's a potential for a number of things to weirdly still get sequels, as long as there's a good enough story. Like Steven Spielberg gets asked all the time if there ever is going to be a Goonies sequel, and Steven Spielberg is to say, it's like, well, every time we go on and try to write a script for a sequel, it's nothing ever good from the previous movie. So, like, unless we can just kind of figure out some beautiful way to make a better Goonies movie, we're just never going to make another one. So, and plus, there's also movies that are never going to see a sequel or a light of day of it just because, like, there are people that just don't want it to happen. Like, Back to the Future is never going to have another sequel. Uh, because, of course, the person who was to originally do the story is to say, like, okay, I was only going to do this number of films and no more. So, that's sad, but it's the truth. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.